Okay, so great to be back here. Many years. We're going to be speaking today, so the topic's conscious you, and I'm going to speak to you a bit about a concept which is from the Bhagavad Gita, which some of you may have heard of, which is a text of ancient India, and how it informs a perspective in terms of decision making and raising consciousness. And in order to do that, I'm going to take you on a little bit of journey just in terms of some of the premises or foundations which inform that framework, so that you can get into what that framework means and how you can apply it. So we'll talk a bit about that. I'll give you a flavor of it. It's both a simple and a complex framework, but you'll catch it really quickly. So yeah, let's get on to the first concept that we need to explore, which is about chance. So when you speak about chance, people often refer to flipping a coin, and that's what probability? Flipping a coin is what probability? Yeah, it's not a trick question. So it's a 50-50, yeah, 50%. So we colloquially say you've got a 50% chance of it being heads. Yep. And we use that kind of phraseology a lot. But I'm going to say here that it doesn't really make sense, right? It doesn't make sense because I'm flipping the coin and I'm saying it's chance because I don't know all the information that goes into determining whether it's going to be heads or tails. Okay, so if you were to be able to control, let's say you've got a robot that flips coins. If you're able to control to the minuscule kind of level of control everything about that flip in terms of the force of it, the atmospheric pressure, etc., etc., etc. If you were to control all of those factors, what would be the probability of it being either heads or tails if you determined to try and make it heads? 100%. So where did chance go? Yeah, where did it go? So what happened to the idea of chance in that example? Any takers? So it doesn't exist, but where did it go? Because it existed a second ago, right? So we were talking about me flipping a coin. You got a 50-50 chance. Now you got a robot doing it, and it's 100%. The reason is because we don't know. We don't know, and we can't control what's going into that action to be able to determine whether it's going to be heads or tails. So to give you another example, let's say I'm on my way here and I missed the bus and I'm late. Okay, so why am I late? Oh, bad luck. I missed the bus. Well, it's not bad luck. We know that luck doesn't exist. The reason I was late was because I woke up late, I was late, eating my dinner, the bus got a puncture, I don't know, right? There's a ton of reasons, but we don't know all those reasons that went into that, and therefore we say it was bad luck. So what happens is you have a bunch of determinants that go into whether or not you're going to get a particular outcome in a particular situation. And because those determinants are so complex, and because they are distanced in time and space, because all of that's going on, we narrow that concept down to chance. Chance basically means I don't know. I don't know the reason, and therefore I'm calling it chance. Because think about it this way, right? If you actually believed in the concept of chance, you'd be stopping the scientific process of inquiry. Science means to go back and back and back to try and find out cause, right? So you're trying to find cause. Now, if I say to you, if you ask me what's the cause of X, and I say chance, what happens to your inquiry? You've stopped it dead. Well, you can't go further than that because it's chance. So that's the problem with chance. Everyone clear on this point? Okay, so this is going to be something that comes up a bit later on. All right, now we're going to talk about degrees of freedom. So here's this guy on his bike, and he thinks at this point in time he has a decision to make, and his decision is thinking, I want a mobile phone and I want it for free. So I have a decision to make, right? So my decision is, do I steal this phone or not? right? In this moment, that's my decision. Agreed? That's okay? All right. Now, he's made the decision. He's going to take it. Now, is his decision still existing that can I take the phone or not? That decision is gone, right? So now there's that decision tree has narrowed. Now there's a different decision here. Now it's like, well, what do I do now? So I've stolen the phone, and now I can choose to either give myself up or not. Okay? Well, he makes a choice there, and now he's got a decision. What's his decision here? Am I innocent or guilty? Am I going to plead guilty or not? So you can see like these decisions are not the same as they were at the beginning of the tree. Yeah? So when we talk about freedom, we're talking about it in the context of decision trees, right? You're going down a certain route, and when you go down that route, the pre-existing fork no longer exists for you because you've made a decision. Okay, so and then he has a decision about whether he's going to try and break out or not. Okay, so at each step, at each decision that we're making, it's changing what's open to us. So this is the idea of we have reducing degrees of freedom according to the decisions that we're making. Does that concept make sense? Yeah, with everyone? Okay, all right. So this is actually a photo, I think it's called Echo Mountain. So you shout into that into that makeshift megaphone, and you hear the echo. So you've done this before, right? So and kids love it. Now the reason why we love shouting and hearing an echo is because it's slightly counterintuitive, isn't it? Why is it counterintuitive? Why is an echo in the mountain counterintuitive? What's happening there? Yeah, you're hearing it back, but what's the problem? What's going on? Why does it sound strange? Okay, so there's a gap. There's two things happening. One is there's a gap. I shout, and then something shouts back at me, right? So there's one thing. There's a gap. What's the second thing? Well, the second thing is I'm standing here shouting, and then there's a voice that comes from back over there that sounds a bit like me, but it comes 2 seconds later, and it's not coming from here, it's coming from over there. That's weird, no? So it's a weird thing for us. So this is an example of how when there's a cause, so look, there's no problem there, right? That doesn't surprise you guys. Why not? Because I'm making the sound here, you're hearing the sound from where I'm making the action, and it's at the same time. So there's no distance between time, or there is, but there's hardly any distance between time and space, between the action, the point of where the noise is coming from, and you hearing the noise. It all adds up. Make sense? Okay? But in an echo, you've got something else going on. That's why it's strange to us, because we're used to this. This our minds can deal with. Our minds can deal with a cause and effect when time and space are close. Our minds are good at dealing with that. But when you separate out the cause and effect in time and space, our minds don't like that. It's very strange for us. Is that okay? All right. Now, if you throw a ball, okay, throw a tennis ball, you know how to do, you know what's going to go on there, right? You can predict pretty much. We're good at catching, we're good at throwing. We can compute that. But if you throw a bird, it's not the same calculation, right? Why not? Well, it's got its own, you've got your thing going on, and it's got its thing going on, right? There's another actor going. So like the ball has no kind of motive or purpose or intent going on here, right? Whereas the bird does. So in the world that we're dealing with, and this is, as I said, here we're talking about foundational principles to bring us to the framework that underpins what the Gita is talking about. Because what we're talking about is, in the world that we live in, one, our actions, the causal loop between action, cause and effect, is distance between time and space. Okay, that's the first thing that happens. So I do an act in the real world, and there isn't an instant response in time and space. And the second thing is, I'm not the only actor. I'm not the only person. has introduced, yeah, I did a course in negotiation at LBS, and one of the really interesting things I find about when I was working in the corporate world anyway, about negotiation, is that most people go into a negotiation and they've spent most of the time thinking about what they're going to say. Well, why wouldn't you? But like, if you really want to negotiate, you should spend most of your time thinking about what's the other person going to say. Because what you're going to say is simple, that's in your control. But what's the other person going to say? So like, we tend to engage with the world as if we were the only actor. I'll do this, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do that. Like what the other person will do, or other people will do, I mean, it's not even part of our consideration. So there's these two principles that are happening here. Okay, and that's not. There's an area of study called systems dynamics. Some of you, if you've studied engineering, you may have come across it. We did it in the MBA because essentially, because people noticed that it is very difficult in complex systems which have feedback loops, time delays, different actors, things that we just find difficult to process or map in traditional business process mapping techniques. Because they were finding that, they came up with this, maybe 50 to 70 years ago, something like that type of time frame in terms of systems dynamics. Interestingly, the person who came up with it, in his book called The Fifth Discipline, Peter Senge, he quotes the Bhagavad Gita. So we'll come on to why he quotes the Gita, but he quotes the Gita because the Gita informs this way of thinking about systems. So systems dynamics is a methodology for being able to try and make complex variables, as what we've talked about just now, to try and bring them into a mappable process. So what we've got here is, and sorry, this shows my age. This is a slide showing how the thermostat on a shower, how you have a desired temperature. You turn the thermostat on the shower up or down depending on what your desired temperature is, and then the water temperature changes, okay? Now, in modern systems, the distance in time between the action of changing the thermostat and the water temperature is very close, so you don't have the same problem as much. So here, what we've got is we've got a desired temperature. The T gap is your time gap, okay? You got your tap setting, and you got the water temperature, okay? Now, what happens is, because there's a time gap, so I turn the valve, but there's a time gap. So I think, well, it's not hot enough. So I turn the gap, I turn it more. And it's getting warm, but it's still not hot. I turn it more. And then all of a sudden, the water's actually kicking in now, and then it's too hot. So then I turn it back. So I don't know, have you ever experienced that in a, yeah, okay, all right. So this is what you get. Make sense, right? You've got like a, high variation in the beginning, and then you kind of like figure it out and you adjust it, and then you get to the temperature you want to get to. Okay, right. So that's straightforward. What about, so in this system, all that's happening in this map is that you've got two people. You've got two people trying to adjust the temperature at the same time in different units, but one is affecting the other. Okay, so do you remember, like, so I can figure it out because I'm working by myself, but I've got somebody else who's trying to do the same thing and their water temperature is affecting mine. So do you know, can you think about, like, so if we, in this instance, it's taking you about a minute, well, 40 to 50 seconds to get to a point where you're at the temperature you want to get to. What do you think it would be in this circumstance? Any guesses?
Never get there.
Pretty close. Keeps going. It's like insane. It's like, there's just this constant expectation that you're going to get there, and there's this constant fluctuation. So essentially the point is really that just re-emphasizing this idea that the process of systems dynamics teaches us the way in which we as human beings engage with the world is that we find it very confusing in terms of cause and effect and in being able to predict and control what's coming next. Okay, and this is just a bit like, you know, chaos theory was founded on something quite similar, that the idea is that you can predict now what's going to happen in the future, but you can't approximately. That approximation, deviation doesn't apply into the future, because essentially if we're living in a deterministic world, which is this whole idea about, we spoke about in the beginning, about chance, right? So like if you got a deterministic world, you can determine everything. But a slight variation from that doesn't apply. And now when we talked about this, the idea of the bird flying, right? What that's also showing us is, like, so there's this idea that if we refer to the world in a deterministic way, where does free will lie? So if we have a purely deterministic world, right, what happens to free will? It's gone. Which is a strange notion, right? Because a lot of science believes in a deterministic world. And yet we have, well, let me ask you, what happens when you get rid of free will? What happens when you get rid of the concept of free will? What do you do with law and order, right? How can you hold somebody accountable for a crime if there's no free will? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but that's a big piece. So there is an issue. And then if you talk about free will, then the question is, okay, where does free will lie? Where does it exist exactly? Because obviously it's not in the chemicals. So it's not in the chemicals, where is it? And if we believe in a deterministic world, how is that reconciled with free will? And these are some of the, again, speaking about fundamentals here, principles here, just because this is the type of question that the Gita seeks to respond to. Okay, so we know, like, so the idea is, how do we get to a situation where the wider, longer term effects of our actions are clearer to us, more predictable to us, and we're able to control it better? Okay, that's the kind of premise behind what we're going to talk about, which is the gunas, or the three modes. And so just as a summary of what we've spoken about so far, okay? So we've got this idea of complex determinism and others, so other actors. So we spoke a bit about that, about chance, determinism, and other actors in terms of others imposing upon us, that limiting our free will. We talked about the degrees of freedom being limited as we go down a decision tree. And then this notion of a loss of control and an unpredictable future. That's what it kind of leads on to. Are you with me? Yeah? Okay, with me so far. Okay, so now we move on. I had to put the slide up here because of where we are. I hear this is where one of the scenes was shot. So it's interesting actually, because it fits quite well, because the film Inception was this idea, right? The idea, the kind of notion of Inception was, you can plant an idea in somebody's mind to make them think it was their idea, right? That was kind of, so they're going around doing whatever they're doing and trying to plant ideas in people's minds. So it fits in really well, because the gunas is this concept of, what are the forces that act upon us, that make us behave or act in ways that we not necessarily feel are our own? Like, have you ever had that kind of sense where you felt like almost pushed into doing something that you don't really think you want to do or should do? Or so there's that. So there's a question that Arjun asks in the Gita, which Arjun is the warrior prince who's speaking to Krishna. It's a dialogue, but the Gita is a dialogue between the two of them. And Arjun asks that question, that what is it that impels us to act in ways that we essentially know that we shouldn't? And it's not, the answer is not the inception answer, but let me ask you this. In this picture, is this child doing this out of choice? Is this child, let me be more specific, is this child lifting this stone out of choice? Does she have a choice? No, yes or no? Does she have a choice? Difficult? Struggling? Yeah, go on. She doesn't think she has a choice. Oh, interesting. Okay, let's hold that one. Very good. Okay, so here, I mean, here's a product. Those of you who are studying business, here's a product. On the product, it says, smoking kills, and on the other side of the product, it says, highly addictive, don't start. Not very good marketing, is it? Not very good marketing. Not many products that will say, here, please buy this, it will kill you. That's exactly what's going on here, right? People are buying it. So what's going on here? Does that person have a choice? Has a choice? Has a choice? At the start? Okay, so hold that one. So we've got two responses here. So at the start, and thinks she has a choice, right? That was the... Okay, what about this? We deal with a lot of this in schools. And I see you laugh, you're probably all the same. I mean, the adults are worse than the kids. So, has a choice or no? Was that a no? Or was it? No choice, yeah? No choice, okay. And this? Choice? You feel you all have a choice when you go to a party? Okay, so I forced the yes, no, but as we know, it's not as straightforward as that, right? For some of the reasons that you said, and you said about a choice at the start. Remember the point about the decision trees? We know how habits work. We know how external pressure works upon us, whether that's social pressure, peer pressure, other pressures. And we know what that could potentially do. Think about the decision tree again, what that could do to our decision tree in terms of the initial choice that we may hold and what that then does further along the line. And of course, earlier on, with the girl holding the stone, the choice is, yeah, she has a choice, but what's the alternative, right? Like, okay, technically she could put the stone down, but what's the alternative? What are the repercussions that come from that? So choices, so how we think about choice underpins of obviously how we think about ethics and how we live in the world, right, day to day. But these are complex things. They're not straightforward. So this is where we're going to come onto the gunas. Now, I'm going to give you the real kind of high level, a simple version, which is going to get you inside what are called the gunas or the modes, so that you can capture it real quick. And then we'll talk about a bit more of the detail, but I want you to capture the framework really quickly, okay? There are 3 modes. They are ignorance, passion, and goodness. These are the 3 modes, states of being. Modes used in the philosophical sense of the word mode. So 3 states of being. And these affect everything. They affect our state of mind. They can describe states of being, states of interaction, and we'll come on to some examples of this. So let's get into this. So what's the mode of ignorance look like? Okay, so mode of ignorance looks, can you read that? Okay, so it will go away, I don't care, everyone else is doing it, so not my problem, and other self-destructive behaviors. Do you get a sense of what that mode feels like? Have you ever felt yourself in that kind of situation? Interactions, engagement, interactions with others, yourself feeling like that when you wake up one morning? It's driven by a sense of procrastination and there's a yeah, well, that's why it's called ignorance. So the idea that this is what it kind of feels like, and it's not a very happy place to be. Okay? Is ignorance, have you caught it? Yeah, in summary? Okay. Okay, here we go to passion. If you're not looking at the bottom right side of this picture, then you're missing it. So passion, what does passion look like? I must have it. I don't care what it takes. I want it now. Get out of my way. Driven by greed, addiction, risk, but also creativity and intense activity, because I want it now. And it doesn't matter what it costs to get me it. Does that make sense to you? You caught it? Okay. Now we come to goodness. Okay? So, goodness is this. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. I've thought this through carefully. This is the best long-term outcome. We can all win, and it's considered and considerate. Does that give you a sense of what that is? Now, I know that these three modes, as outlined here, I know what they feel like on face value. They feel simplistic and obvious and all the rest of it. Hold judgment for now. Okay. But the three are clear. Okay. Sometimes when we think about goodness, because it imposes certain restrictions on us, right? So here's this guy driving on obviously the wrong side of the road, and he's expressing his free will, right? Because if I want to drive on the wrong side of the road, I should be able to. So how do rules overlap with individual free will? Anyone want to make a statement about that? Go on. Okay, fantastic. So the rule, so if everyone is driving in whichever side of the road they want, are we going to have a better or worse road system, right? Clearly worse. So if the distance from A to B is 10 minutes, according to everyone following the rules of the road, what happens to that 10 minutes if everyone does whatever they want? Okay, it goes up, not down. So your unlimited free will limits free will. Does that make sense? You need restrictions to enable people to have a level of free will. Because if you don't have any restrictions, you don't have free will. Free will goes away. Because then you get anarchy, and anarchy means, it means survival of the fittest, which basically will not give you we're in UCL, so it will not give you a utilitarian outcome. Okay, so the point is there is a level of structure and framework and rules that and the whole point of different debates around political systems and structures often is about what is the version that creates the right balance or the optimal balance to maximize free will, limiting rules and regulation to be able to do that, to be able to maximize that. Okay, and it's that balance which we're constantly trying to shift, because we want to, and you get, I mean, this is a big thing even in like modern debates around transgender, right? Like it's a huge perspective on that in terms of how do you limit the individual's free will, or should you, for the impact it has on others. Okay, so now we're going to get into the modes and how this relates to increasing free will. Okay, so remember, free will was one of the key principles that we've been talking about. So here we've got the mode of ignorance. So that's the lazy choice, easy choice, carelessness, disregard, procrastinating, sense of resignation. Okay, so we've seen that before. We've got the mode of passion. That's the alluring choice, right? Remember, I want it now. And it's got extremes. Short-term focus, and there's an immediate buzz followed by this lull. And that's the dopamine effect. For those of you who know it, that's the dopamine effect. And you've got goodness. So this is the tough choice. So you've got the easy choice, this is the tough choice. And it's the one that's driven by knowledge and purpose, long-term versus short-term. That's why it's tough. Okay? And that's where, acting in these different modes, is where free will rises. Now, it seems like in the mode of goodness, free will should be reduced because I'm not doing anything and everything I want right now. So you might think, well, mode of passion seems like a lot of free will going on here because I can do whatever I like and it doesn't matter, and my impact on anyone else doesn't matter. I don't care about it. But remember, driving on the wrong side of the road. The total effect of that is you are limiting or reducing your free will in acting in ways where you are subjected to, remember this idea of being almost forced to do something that you don't really feel like you should be doing. But there's something that's driving you towards that end because you've reduced your degrees of freedom as you've gone down a decision tree. So you then end up being driven by conditioning, by habits, by essentially things that you're just so used to doing that you can't break out of that cycle, and there's no conscious endeavor, thought, or effort being activated here, which is where the mode of goodness comes up. So that's where you're making conscious choices. And that's why it's, even though it seems externally regulated and potentially even adding rules, because you're thinking about, you're withholding responses, you're withholding a kind of sense pleasure, immediate pleasure for a longer term purpose. So it seems like you're restricting it, but actually you're increasing free will. Does that make sense based on what we've been talking about? And that's the difference, right, between a human response and an animal response. The animal response, as we know, it's like stimulus response, no gap. Human beings are supposed to have a gap, right? We're supposed to have a gap because we're supposed to be thinking in that gap. I can't remember who said that, but anyway. All right, so here's some examples. We've talked about the modes. You guys have got a bit of a picture about each of the modes. And I'm just going to give you some ways in which the Gita describes these different modes, an example. So here we talk about state of mind. Now, I'm going to do one or maybe two of these, and then you should be able to guess the rest, okay? So state of mind, lacking goals or desire to achieve. So there's a complete lack here. Disinterested in knowledge or personal growth. Life feeling out of balance, confused, helpless, depressed, jaded, angry. Yeah? Ignorance? Passion. Highly motivated to succeed. Anxious. Anxious because they want the result. They want the result now. So there's an anxiety that builds up. Desires and emotions are hard to control because they're so extreme. And there's nothing holding them in check. Goodness, peaceful, calm, objective. Sense of control over the desires and thoughts. And instinctively knowing the right thing to do. Is that okay? Does it sound okay? In keeping with what we've been discussing? That's the mode of goodness. State of mind. Making personal choices in ignorance. Unconcerned about consequences or benefits. I don't really care. I don't really care. It's not my problem. Seeking the easy way out. Because you're constantly looking at the lazy or procrastinating version of this, and easily discouraged. Because you can't be bothered. Okay, what does it look like in passion? Motivated by prospect of reward or pleasure. That's what's getting me out of bed, is the idea that I'm going to have some kind of reward or pleasure. Craving personal credit or recognition, which, is highly toxic at a certain level, because it's constantly seeking something. And that's a real tax upon our own psychology. Exploiting knowledge solely for personal gain or status and in goodness. Calm, regulated, desiring to achieve a greater cause outside of myself. Okay, there is something more than just me. Sacrificing short-term gain to do the right thing. Okay, now, see if you can do this by yourselves. I want you to shout out words that come to your mind. Okay? In ignorance, communication in the modes. What does it look like? Shout out some words. I'll wait till we get 5 words. Anything? We'll do. Shout them out. Harshness. So we'll go with 3. Harshness. Otherwise this will take too long. Thoughtless. Rude. Okay? Aggressive, criticizing, cynical, suspicious. I mean, this is kind of the same stuff we're talking about, okay? In passion. Shout them out.
Motivated. Personally motivated.
Personally motivated. Okay, good. Exploitative. Sorry? Relentless. Okay. Coercive. bit like that: impulsive, reactive, spontaneous, self-involved, narcissistic. Okay, and in goodness. Thoughtful. Encouraging. Nice. Discipline. Okay. Catching it? So listen well, curious, honest about motivations. So that's an important one. Feelings, avoiding and ignoring gossip. Okay. Careers, we've got one more after this. Now this is an interesting one. Actually, this might be hard, so let me give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So this is like the workplace. Okay, so this is like, what is that career, what does it look and feel like in that space? So work, how people are treated, how the individual is thinking as an employee. They don't care about their own development. Just get my paycheck, I'm out of here. Or the well-being of others. What does passion look like? I'll go with 3 again. Passion. In the workspace. Self-centered. Okay, I only care about myself, yeah. Throwing under people under, yeah, okay. Sorry? Profit. So self-identifying as heroic or courageous. Ambitious, determined, workaholic, desiring personal accomplishment, wealth and power. I should put throwing other people under the bus under here. Okay, and in goodness. Sorry? Empathetic. Okay, so kind of a collective outcome. Yep. One more, I'll let you go.
Great to go.
Okay. So motivated by self-development, like motivated by, I want to be better. This aspiring to provide quality and attractive that improves, like you want to improve the lives of others as part of your work. Okay? All right. So, thanks for bearing with me on that. So I'm going to sum up. The 3 modes are like the 3 primary colors. And this is what I mean. When you look at the 3 primary colors, if you just see them in isolation, they look like a pretty naive, a pretty simplistic, overly simplistic approach to color. You understand? Like it's like that's not what color is. We see zillions of colors around the world and in our daily life and in different circumstances. How can it just be 3 colors? All that kind of stuff, right? But you get the point. The point is that the modes don't exist in isolation. They exist in combination. They exist in every aspect and manifestation of life. We talked about it here in the workplace, in our mindset, in our communication, in our relationships with others. Whatever it is that you want to analyze or kind of look at, the modes work. And I worked in strategy consultancy and banking and did my MBA, of course. And I know more. But I came across more frameworks than I care to remember. And I can honestly, hand on heart, say, this is the most powerful framework I've ever come across. The reason, and part of the reason is, it's so simple, and yet it gives you access to such complexity. It's so simple and complex at the same time, and it's applicable in any situation. It's a universal application. It's applicable anywhere, to anything. And as you go from a unconscious competence, that's where we want to get to. It's like riding a bike, right? So like when you start riding a bike, it's hard, obviously, right? You keep falling off, and you have to be really conscious about what you're doing. And when you learn how to ride a bike, then it's like completely unconscious. So you're going from conscious competence to unconscious, and it's that movement to a situation where you can apply this in any aspect. And I can get on a bike now and I don't need to think about it, and I'm riding. And it's the same thing with the modes. That in the beginning, when I'm analyzing the modes and I'm thinking about my choices and I'm thinking about my words and the way I'm looking at a situation and what will come from it. Now, when I'm doing that in the beginning, that's work for me. It's me learning to ride a bike. But as I do it, I get better at it. And now, like, or rather, as we practice it, it becomes second nature. And when it becomes second nature, it's so easy to apply because of its simplicity. And the beauty I feel of it is that what it allows us to do is to really do the two things which the principles that we talked about in the beginning in terms of time and space and cause and effect and free will, causing mayhem in our lives because, you know, we do an action and we're expecting a response from another person or a context or a workplace or whatever. We're expecting a certain type of response and we get something completely different and we're like, what happened there? And what this allows us to do is to be able to take more control of a situation, because it's so, as you talked about in systems dynamics, right? The world is so complex. Our brains cannot deal with that complexity in terms of being able to bring it down to a simple form. And this is what the modes does. It brings all of that complexity and it gives you a tool kit or a framework to be able to bring that complexity down to a simple decision-making process, an analysis, a framework that allows us to take more control of a particular situation and to be able to predict the future of what's going to come from that. Because we know what comes from ignorance, we know what comes from passion, and we know what comes from goodness. We know the outcomes of these things. So we know the outcome. You know, like if I'm in an interaction and I'm getting really agitated by that interaction, and in that moment I'm just going and going and going and getting more and more angry or more agitated by it, like I recognize that as ignorance. So I may think that I'm getting something out of this, but I can be sure that the outcome of that will not be good. And the outcome of passion, we know, is going to give me the instant response. It's going to give me the instant gratification. It's the alluring choice. But I know that there's something to follow after that. And I know the same thing with goodness. I know that it's the tough choice in the beginning, but I know in the longer term and the shared consequence of the outcome of that, it's a better one. So these things allow us to access and simplify what is otherwise a highly complex world, which basically what we do is rely upon luck. That's what most of us do. We live our life and we rely upon just, well, I'll do something and then I'll kind of like. We have no way of getting behind the complexity, because all our brains are used to doing is listening and engaging with this. We are not used to dealing with echoes and throwing birds. We just don't do, our brains don't do that. So remember the summary I provided earlier. So this is kind of an updated version of that, taking into account, which is what the Gita does, taking into account what we've been speaking about. So we haven't spoken about karma. I mean, it's a topic in itself, which we'll perhaps come to at some point. But this idea of action and reaction, that's the basics of karma. Okay, so like karma is a very complicated topic that needs more explanation. But the idea of karma in the Gita is there is an action and there is a reaction. That action may be separated in time and space from its reaction. Right? Just like the echo, like it may be completely separated and it may be confusing for you, but there is a reaction that is related to every action. And the gunas, which we've been talking about, the modes. So these two form part of the framework. We haven't talked about the whole framework of the Gita, but two critical components of the framework of the Gita, which says, if you understand these principles and these concepts as they exist in the world, if you understand this from the perspective of the Gita, that allows us to engage with, instead of reducing degrees of freedom, allows us to express freedom. Do you remember, as we go up the modes, we're able to express conscious choice. Conscious choice means free will. Conscious choice, as in free will, does not mean driving on the wrong side of the road. That's not what free will means. It's not free will. It does not mean doing anything I want, because that's typically driven by habit and conditioning. What free will means is that there is a conscious choice. Now, for that conscious choice to manifest, for you to be able to make a conscious choice, guess what? You have to be conscious. You have to be conscious. And living and acting in ignorance and passion is less conscious than goodness. So it stands to reason that free will rises up the modes. As you go up the modes from ignorance to passion to goodness, your level of free will is rising. And what that allows us to do is to gain more control and to be able to better predict the outcomes in an otherwise highly unpredictable world. So this is, I've taken you like on a really quick tour through some of the principles that underpin this framework, but I hope it's given you some kind of insight into what this means and how it can be applied. But if if it's of interest and you want to explore more, then there are resources that can help you do that. But thank you so much for your attention, and I think we've got some time for questions. We have? Okay, so we got some time. So I'll take a couple of questions and then we can wrap up. So anything that anybody wants to ask or explore or comment on?
So we find that in this world, there's people who are working in the mode of passion. They get ahead and they stay ahead. There's corrupt people. And the people in the mode of goodness tend to kind of stay on the level of the mode of ignorance people. So how can you be motivated to stay in the mode of goodness when you know it's not getting you anything, which I guess is a mode of passion way of thinking. But yeah.
No, I've done this, had this kind of conversation in banks, and that's the first question that comes up. So yeah, look, it's interesting. I during my MBA, I did some study around social enterprise and some of the ethics behind how businesses look to ethics. And I think it's a misconception. I think there are two misconceptions. One is sometimes people confuse goodness and ignorance, like you pointed out or implied in that, right? So sometimes goodness from an external perspective might look like ignorance, because let's say there's a stimulus and a response, right? So I'm delaying my response because I'm thinking about it. So if I'm thinking about it and I'm trying to be conscious in my decision making, there's inaction there. So you don't know what's going inside of my brain, right? Whereas if I'm also in ignorance, I'm just not responding because I can't be jacked. Like I cannot be bothered to respond, and therefore I'm just switched off. Now, from an external perspective, the two look quite similar. There's inactivity going on, right? But internally, what's going on is a very different thing, because there's consciousness being applied in one and not the other. So one point is that sometimes goodness may be confused for ignorance from an external perspective if we're not conscious of what we're doing. So now the second thing is that you said the mode of passion, and this is an interesting point. The mode of passion, we think, will get us to the top and keep us at the top, right? That's the idea. And goodness will kind of be almost like a level below, almost like mediocre. But the thing is that's the very nature of passion, is that it's not stable. So ignorance is stable, goodness is stable, passion fluctuates. That's what passion does. It's the nature of passion. We know that. We know that from biology and psychology, and from just actions that people take in the mode of passion. There's a high and then there's a low. So that's the nature of passion, is that it's transient. And that's like, I mean, the dopamine cycle is such a good example of that, right? Like there is no constant high. Like, and you have to moderate your expectation for you to stay at a higher level, right? Because if your expectation is through the roof, then you spike and then you drop. So that's why you get this whole thing, winner's curse type thing. It's like you get something that you really, really, really wanted, and then you don't want it. And it's like, what happened there? It's because of that spike and drop. So the mode of passion, by its nature, is transient, and it will fluctuate. Now, what people want, what the material world tries to do, and this is a kind of like the holy grail of materialistic society, is to get passion and to keep it there, right? That's the holy grail. It's like, get to passion, enjoy, separate out my enjoyment from the responsibility that comes from that enjoyment, and stay there. But you can't have it. And we know you can't have it, because it's been proven time and time again, whether it's in the financial kind of realm, or whether it's in social realm, it's in education, it's in people chasing after whatever kind of enjoyment that people chase after. You just cannot have it. Intrinsically built into the world, you cannot get passion and stay at passion. Though, completely accept, that is the holy grail. But the idea is, the level, and here's an experiment, right? when we think about happiness, ultimately we're talking about happiness. What's going to give me most happy for the most amount of time, okay? So when you think about happiness, if I ask you to think about the times in your life where you were most happy, okay? So just hold that, all of you think about, I'm not going to ask you to share it, so it's a private thing, but just think about the times in your life where you were most happy. Happiness at its like, when you really felt happy. Now, without you sharing the individual, well, I mean, you can if you disagree. Without kind of unpicking the details of that, I can almost assure you that the majority, and you can put your hand up if I'm wrong, the majority of you will be thinking about times and experiences and interactions which had to do with relationships, than it had to do with materialistic things, whether that's kind of, intoxicants or sex or money or all of the other things that we might attribute externally to happiness. So what I'm saying is that the mode of passion is based on these types of things, because it's not caring about the other person, it's just caring about what I want and what I'm going to get and how I'm going to enjoy it. And it's that extreme peak experience that we're looking for all the time. And it just doesn't work for us. Like human society, it just doesn't work for us. So, sorry, that's a long answer to a short question, but that's essentially where I'd go with that, is that it's the Holy Grail, but it doesn't exist. Yeah? Okay. Anything else?
Thanks very much. I was going to ask, obviously there's a rise in terms of sustainable business practices. I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of, do you think that's a shift towards goodness more in general, or do you think that there's perhaps a lacking there?
Sustainable business practices?
Generally, kind of, ESG is becoming a massive theme within business and kind of decision making.
Okay, so let's see how well you guys understood this talk. So the question is, there's a general shift or awareness of sustainable business practices, and the question is that a shift towards goodness or not? Is that the question?
Or like, what is there something underlying that's actually not in goodness?
Okay. Right? Yeah. All right, so is it a shift to goodness or not, or is it a shift to something else? Thoughts?
Might just be to increase sales.
Might be to increase sales, which would be what passion? Which would be passion, not goodness. Masked as goodness, but the motivation there, remember, is we're not just thinking about the external action, we're also thinking about the consciousness that's driving it. Now, what's interesting is, and this is why, again, the complexity that can be brought down to a simple point here, is that the Gita talks about the consciousness with which a decision is made will affect the mode it is made in, and therefore will affect the outcome. Now, that's an interesting point. It's interesting for, like, if I because normally when you're in a workplace or even in an education environment, nobody's talking to you about what consciousness did you make that decision in. They just care about what decision did you make, left or right. Right? We don't care about the consciousness with which you made the decision, left or right. So in education, to give an example, we talk about caring about the consciousness of the teacher who's teaching these children. Now that's kind of like, we get a lot of responses around that, which is like, oh, what are you talking about? Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, they're just teaching something. They're teaching material, they're teaching stuff. But we know, as human beings, people that you've learned from, people that you've engaged with, mentors, guides, teachers, etc., right? Even family members and friends. It's not just about what they're saying. It's not even just about their tone of voice. There's something else as human beings we are reading into things that we are engaging with. And the point that's underlying that is, what is the consciousness? What is the mode in which they are situated that I am responding to? And that is eliciting a certain response from me because I'm engaging with that mode. And that's why we care about the consciousness of teachers. And that's why businesses should care about the consciousness with which they're making a decision. It's not just about, as you're saying here, it's not just about there's a shift towards sustainable business practice and therefore that's in the mode of goodness because sustainability is in the mode of goodness. Yes, that's one aspect of it, for sure. We all want the world to move in a more sustainable direction. But if that is a superficial kind of veneer to what's going on underneath, and we're not addressing the underlying issue around consciousness, then that's going to have a limited upside, and it's going to have a downside. Is that okay? Okay. One more? One more.
Right. So out of these three systems, we're supposed to keep ignorance quite low, right? Or do you have to negate it like completely? You need to have some of ignorance, or like you need to have the highest of goodness, and next is passion, and then ignorance. Correct.
Okay. Is that the question, or you want to?
I mean, let's still follow.
Yeah.
So let's say go to a supermarket and there are a lot of things to buy, and this is terms of the brain and thinking. So you leave a supercomputer. If you think about what's right for me to buy based on my nutrition and diet and cost, everything, it'll take at least like 6 hours to decide what to buy. So that's where my your prefrontal cortex comes in. But your brain involved mechanisms like emotions. So you shunt it and you immediately go get something that gives you like energy. So you survive. That's how your survivalism was helped. So you need to have a balance of these three, right? So that balance is the hardest part.
Okay, very good. So two things you said there. One is the complexity of the choice, which, as I was saying before, that complexity reduces. So the difficulty in that decision-making process reduces over time and with practice, right? You'll learn how to ride a bike, and then it'll be easy. When you're learning how to ride a bike, it's really hard, and it feels hard. Okay. Now, the second point is around the balance, and I'm glad you raised the point. So the second point is that remember I said like these modes don't exist in isolation. There's a blend. Now what we want to do is to optimize that blend. Now we've all got different personalities, different backgrounds, conditioning, genetics, etc., 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 right? Upbringings, environment. So all of those things are feeding into what it is that we are going to be inclined towards. So, and this is another fantastic kind of approach of the Gita, is that it's extremely individualistic in the sense of it's your journey. This is your decision. So when Krishna is saying to the Arjun that you have to decide this for yourself. So it's the same thing with the modes, that we need to be able to get to find out for ourselves. And over time, we know the aspiration is to try and, as you say, minimize ignorance, but it's not to say that there's not going to be any ignorance. There's always going to be some ignorance, but you're trying to manage that. And most importantly, to be aware of it when it is ignorance. Because most of the problem is that we're not even aware of it when we're in ignorance. But now, when you can name it, you can label it, you can box it. I was acting in ignorance in that exchange with that person. Okay, or I was spacing out that night and I was in ignorance. And then passion has its place. Like that whole intense activity, that whole aspect of creativity, that whole motivation to be able to achieve, that has its place. Okay, but like we were speaking about earlier, it's volatile, really volatile, and it can become toxic and corrosive. So we have to manage that. The way to manage it is to temper it with goodness. So you're like trying to contain and minimize ignorance and isolate it and name it when you experience it. You're trying to engage passion in a way which is constructive so that it can rise to goodness as opposed to falling to ignorance. Because remember, that's what it means. For something to fluctuate, either you're going to go like this, you're going to go like this and then try and stay at goodness, or you're going to go this, or you're going to fall into ignorance. So like you don't have the choice of staying at passion. So that's the point, that we're trying to kind of say, okay, let's see how we can manage this and use it appropriately so it doesn't become bad for me and everybody around me, and that I know what I'm doing in those circumstances, in those situations. I know what stage and state of consciousness I'm engaging. And then where we can, we try and rise to goodness. And it's a steady thing. It's not happening overnight. But as we engage with the framework, hand on hand, I can say, I find it so extremely helpful, not just like in my personal life, in my work life, in my kind of self-development and spiritual life, in my life in terms of engaging and with others and helping them in their journey, it's indispensable for me. So I think we're at end of time now. So again, thank you for your attention. I hope you got something out of it, and good luck with the journey. Thanks.